The Government of Saskatchewan says it's about fairness. As you know by now, Ottawa announced a carbon tax break on home heating oil, which is used primarily in Atlantic Canada. And the Premier says people in this province deserve the same.
I am calling on the federal government to offer the same carbon tax exemption to Saskatchewan families by extending it to all forms of home heating, not just heating oil. It's only fair to other Saskatchewan and Canadian families. Hopefully that exemption will be provided soon. But if not, effective January the 1st, SaskEnergy will stop collecting and submitting the carbon tax on natural gas.
That's Premier Scott Moe in October of last year. Since then, no one has blinked. The federal government has not expanded its exemption, and now it is January. For the latest on what SaskEnergy is doing, we've reached the Minister, Dustin Duncan. Good morning, Minister. Happy New Year.
Good morning, Stephanie, and Happy New Year to you as well.
What's the latest when it comes to sending on the carbon tax money to Ottawa?
So the latest is that the billing systems have been changed at SaskEnergy as well as at SaskPower for those individuals that use electricity to generate their home heat. It's a small number of individuals, but we wanted to include them. So the billing system has been changed. So any gas consumption at the end of December will have had a carbon tax paid on it. After basically January 1st and forward, there will not be a carbon tax charged. Essentially, you'll see a carbon tax charged on your bill, but then you'll see a corresponding credit from the province to basically zero out that amount. So it'll depending on where you are and your billing cycle, that'll either show up on your January or for sure it'll show up on your February bill. At the same time, SaskEnergy has been collecting up until the end of December, so there will be a payment made in January. That's basically how it works. You pay the month following when you collect. The other change that has taken place is that SaskEnergy is currently the registered distributor of natural gas under the federal legislation. They have sent an application to deregister as the registered distributor of natural gas in Saskatchewan. At the same time, I have sent an application on behalf of the provincial government under my signature to register as the new gas distributor in the province of Saskatchewan. And so we're waiting on those two applications, whether or not the federal minister will accept those applications. So that's the latest of where we're at.
What can you tell us about the application for the provincial government or you personally to be the registered distributor of natural gas?
So it's the provincial government, it's the Crown and Right of Saskatchewan, but me as the minister responsible, I'm the applicant on behalf of the province.
And what's the argument for that change?
So the argument for that is that what the legislature unanimously agreed upon in the fall sitting is a change to the SaskEnergy Act that would basically say that for that very narrow section of the federal legislation, the Part A of the GGPPA, the Greenhouse Gas Pricing Pollution Act, that SaskEnergy would no longer be responsible for the obligations under that very narrow section. But we still need somebody to be obligated by the federal legislation. We're not saying that the federal legislation doesn't count in Saskatchewan. We're just saying that rather than it be SaskEnergy being the responsible person or agency for that section of the federal act, we need somebody to be designated. So what the legislature unanimously agreed to is that would essentially be transferred, those obligations would be transferred to the province and to me as the minister. So we had to send an application to the federal government to basically say that SaskEnergy will no longer be the registered gas distributor and that the province, me as the minister, would be the registered gas distributor. So those applications are before the federal government, before the federal minister, and we're waiting for them to make that decision. That basically gives us the option in the event that they do agree to that, because the legislation says that the minister may or may not accept the application. If the minister does accept those two applications, then basically that will give us options as the province on how we're going to proceed, not just on the collection. That collection issue is not in the legislation. That's already been settled, but essentially on the remittance of a carbon tax. What it all boils down to is that if a decision is made to not remit the carbon tax, it's not SaskEnergy making that decision. And so any potential consequences of making or not making that decision shouldn't be borne by them. It should be borne by the province, by the provincial government, and mainly me as the minister.
And so why did the Premier say that you would stop remitting the tax in January?
Well, it gives us the option. So that was always the intent, is that we wanted to have the option to not remit if the federal government, again, all of this can be solved if the federal government just decides to extend carbon tax relief to all Canadians, including people in Saskatchewan, regardless of their heating fuel. So that's still what we're calling for. And there is time for the federal government to make that decision. Because, again, we've been collecting the carbon tax on the bills to the end of December. A remittance will be made in January, at the end of January, according to the legislation. We're not collecting the dollars right now on anybody's bills, and we'll have to make a decision come at the end of February whether or not that remittance will be made or not. What we're basically saying to the federal government is we want to change who is responsible for that remittance from SaskEnergy to basically me as the minister, because at the end of the day, we're the shareholder on behalf of the people of Saskatchewan, of SaskEnergy, and it'll be our decision whether or not that remittance will be made.
What if they say no to that?
Well, we'll look to see the reasons why they say no. There may be some legal arguments and some legal challenges in terms of their denial of an application, but again, they haven't said one way or the other that they are going to approve or deny our application. At the end of the day, if this change doesn't get made, what we're trying to do is protect, and the legislature unanimously agreed on this, we're trying to protect the people that work at SaskEnergy, the board members, the officers, the agents, the executive members, who under the federal legislation not only can be penalized, fined, and have those types of charges levied, but as well they can be charged criminally, which could include believe it or not, jail time up to 6 months. What we're saying is that nobody at SaskEnergy is going to be responsible for making this decision. We've tried through legislation to indemnify financially anybody at SaskEnergy. The criminal charges, obviously, we can't indemnify that. That's why we're trying to make this change, so that in the event that we do make this decision to not remit, that if there are going to be charges, it won't be anybody at SaskEnergy.
Okay. If you make that decision not to send the money on to Ottawa, then you want the consequence for it. But if you decide to remit the taxes, if you decide at the end of February you will pay, where will that money come from?
Well, we would have to pay that essentially either out of a combination of the GRF or the earnings of SaskEnergy, or some combination of those things.
What sense does that make if there's only one taxpayer?
Well, again, all of this could be solved if the Prime Minister just did the right thing and provide that fairness to all Canadians, including people in Saskatchewan. But at the same time, you know, I think you'll be, just heard on the news, you'll be playing a story about affordability relief by other provinces in reducing things like gas taxes. That has a cost as well. So whether it's a payment made by the province on behalf of the citizens who aren't paying it directly on their bills, or foregoing revenue in the name of gas tax relief or something like that,
it all costs money, but it doesn't all come with all of this legal wrangling. Why don't you just cut the PST or gas tax if you want to save us money?
Well, because this is the principle of fairness when it comes to the carbon tax. Because remember, when we lost the case at the Supreme Court, and again, all along the way, while we've disagreed as a provincial government and as a province on the application of the carbon tax, we've been in compliance and still are in compliance, even though we disagreed with it. In part, we lost the case because the federal government argued and the Supreme Court agreed that any inaction by one region or one province goes against the actions that we're trying to do as a whole, as a country. So the Prime Minister undercut his own argument of why he wanted to put the carbon tax in place in the first place. So this is really just about, we're just looking for fairness. We're not asking for any special treatment. We just want to be treated the way that the Prime Minister has treated one region of the country. And again, remember, it was a federal minister, a Liberal minister, who said if that other regions of the country want the same treatment, they should vote for more Liberal MPs. Yep. So this really was politics. We just want to be treated the same.
Are you playing politics back?
No, we're actually just trying to give to the people of Saskatchewan what the Prime Minister is denying them.
What might this do to the rebates that the Prime Minister gives people, some of whom say they get much more in rebates than they pay in carbon tax?
Well, it really shouldn't have an effect. First and foremost, we don't decide on the rebates. That's for the federal government.
Well, you can't pay rebates with money you don't collect.
Well, we're going to find out pretty soon because the January rebates will be coming out, including to people in Atlantic Canada who aren't paying the carbon tax. And when the Prime Minister announced the decision to remove the carbon tax in Atlantic Canada, there was no announcement at the same time saying that, oh, by the way, in Atlantic Canada, your rebates are going to be reduced. In fact, on that very same announcement, he announced that the rural rebate top-up would go from 10 to 20%. So we haven't heard from the federal government, and they haven't announced that Atlantic Canadians are going to see a reduced
How is it possible that they could continue to hand out money if they don't collect any?
Well, that's a very good question. I think the Prime Minister should answer it.
The math isn't mathing, as they say.
Well, again, but the Prime Minister announced that some Canadians would receive a carve-out. They wouldn't have to pay the carbon tax on the way that they heat their homes in the wintertime for 3 years, and at the same time announced that the rebate was going to increase for rural residents, doubling from 10 to 20%, and didn't actually say that the overall rebate was going to be reduced. So if there is fuzzy math when it comes to the rebate, I don't disagree with that. But again, that's a problem of the Prime Minister's making. So again, if Saskatchewan residents are going to see a reduced rebate because of the plan of the provincial government, then we have another issue of fairness because it doesn't appear that Canadians in Atlantic Canada are going to see a reduced rebate because of what the Prime Minister has done.
Thank you for your time this morning, Minister.
Yeah, thanks for having me, Stephanie.